or I'm using my new hello line, which is alright there chaps. How are you doing? Chaps and chapesses, should I say. So are you ready for a long lesson today? I gave a lesson last night on minor 251s and how to play over them, and I thought it might be fun to sort of redo most of the content of that lesson and fire it up to YouTube so you can learn a bit. So I did do a video a bit like this at some previous point when I went through a lot of the things you can play over minor 251s, but subsequently I've got a few things to add to that which might be nice to talk about, so I'm going to do that. So let's just get straight to it, shall we? We're going to be playing over today this chord progression in a 251, a minor 251 in the key of A minor. These chords. Which is B minor 7 flat 5, or B half diminished, E7, E dominant 7, and A minor. Really basic. Okay, and we're looking at lots of different approaches that we can use to play over this chord progression. Alrighty, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to do it in basically the simplest, most low rent approach, going from that to the more sort of complex and theoretically applied approaches. So basically it's going to start off easy and become harder over time. So if I wind the clock back, say some 30 years to when I was initially learning to play, God, it's probably longer than that now, well, let's say 30 years, and if someone had said to me, well, here's a little chord progression, it's in the key of A minor, what could you play on top of that? I would have went, in my naive way, I would have went, well, I know how to play this scale, A minor, pentatonic or blues. That would be my go-to choice. That's what I would have used back then, and the reason that I still use it today is because it sounds fabby. So we're going to do this zoomed out macro, or if you prefer low rent approach to playing over this 251 to start with. We're just going to consider that it's in the key of A minor very broadly, and we're really going to be ignoring the changes and just playing over it with our A minor pentatonic or blues scale. So that's it. Approach number one, low rent, brain off. It's in the key of A minor, let's play A minor pentatonic. That's right, but we can still make it sound pretty effective. So let's see how we go, see if we can make it sound nice. Pretty groovy. So you see, although it is really simple, it can still sound really, really nice, very melodic. Sometimes I was playing things which were stylistically you might consider them to be idiomatic sounding blues, but a lot of the time when I'm playing pentatonic scales, I'm trying to get away from that typical blues sound. So I'm trying to avoid maybe sounding like, you know, those sorts of sounds, and maybe get more ambiguous intervallic sounds. As you'll see later on, this will really help to bring out some interesting colours. So anyway, this is approach number one. It is the lower end. Turn the brain off, let's just go for it. It's in the key of A minor, do some nice phrasing, make it sound musical, but we don't have to think about the changes. Alright, so let's look at approach number two now. Approach number two is taking a diatonic approach. If we were to ask ourselves which diatonic scale produces these three chords, B minor 7 flat 5, B7 and A minor, if you know anything about your harmonized scales, you would know that the answer to that would be the harmonic minor scale, specifically A harmonic minor. So the scale of A harmonic minor. The scale of A harmonic minor produces all these chords, so it must stand to reason then that if the scale produces or generates these chords, we must be able to play the scale on top of those chords, right? So the chords came out of the scale, therefore we must be able to play the scale over the chords, and indeed you can. So that is our kind of second fairly low rent approach, because we're not thinking too much about the changes yet. We're just kind of going, this one scale fits these chords, and if we handle it correctly, we can make it sound pretty good. So there's only one thing that I would say to be careful about in the scale, and that is if you think about the balance of consonants and dissonances in it, when you get to that F note, which is the flattened 6th degree of the scale, I would be careful with that note when we're playing it over A minor, because it is quite a tension. Could sound nice under certain circumstances, but normally if I do land on that F, I would seek to resolve it, usually down a semitone to the 5th. I mean, ultimately you can play any note on anything, but just if you're just getting into this stuff, I would just be careful of that F note, and your brain may rebel a little bit on the G sharp over the A minor, which to me sounds perfectly concordant, but I know that some people might have a problem with this, because then it would tend to sound like, you know, this A minor major 7, which some people find a little bit funky. And I guess maybe the G sharp also over the B minor 7 flat 5 maybe considered to be a little bit funky, but I kind of quite like it. Alright, so the other thing I'm really going to watch for is that F. So let's just again, mostly turning the brain off, and we're going to apply our A harmonic minor scale over this minor 2-5-1 and make some music from it. So let's just see what happens. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Let's do it. Alrighty, so yeah, it's very, very nice and not, I'd say it's more colourful, obviously more colourful, a bit more interesting than just playing the minor pentatonic scale. It's possibly not as quite as immediately visceral, but it's more sort of, it's more melodic and more expressive, I think, than just straight pentatonic, which in terms of like harmonic outline, pentatonic is the most basic harmonic outline you could do. It's just A minor. And this does have a little bit more of a specific harmonic outline because we can hear more of the colour, and the general harmony is now more clearly outlined. Okay, right, so there's a couple of things in here that I want to talk about. The chord progression could be viewed as having two different halves. So for instance, the B minor 7 flat 5 to E7 part of the chord progression lies on what I would call its dominant side. So this is basically, if you like, an expression of the 5 chord, the dominant side of the scale. And obviously when it goes to A minor, that becomes an expression of what I would call the tonic side of the harmony. So basically, the chord progression for me is really dominant sounds to tonic sounds. Now that means that we can start somewhat dividing the harmony into two different sides. So let's play something, or attempt to play something, which is more specific to the dominant side, and then play something that works more on the tonic side. So let me just explain a little bit what I'm going to do here. Inside the A harmonic minor scale, there lies, on the 7th degree of the scale, there lies a diminished 7th arpeggio. It'll be G sharp diminished 7th arpeggio. This sound. Now, without getting into the theory of it too much, what this arpeggio really represents is an E7 sound, more specifically an E7 flat 9 sound. But what that means is, when we're playing over the dominant side of the chord progression, which is the first two chords, B minor 7 flat 5 and E7, we can leverage or use our G sharp diminished 7th arpeggio, right? And when we get to A minor and we're on the tonic side, we're going to outline something which is extremely tonic sounding. So this is what I'm going to do in this demo. I'm going to apply my G sharp diminished 7th arpeggio over the first two chords, and then over the A minor I'm just going to apply good old reverting to the minor pentatonic or blues scale. So it's still pretty low rent, but we are now starting to divide the harmony a little bit into two different sides and address one side, the dominant side, and address the other side, the tonic side. That's the idea anyway. Alrighty. Tears required to fortify myself during this monster long lesson. So let's just see. I will give you a couple of demos of just the sounds before I get into the improvisation, just so you can hear, alright? Here's the sound of the G sharp diminished 7th arpeggio over the first two chords. And here's A minor pentatonic, back to G sharp diminished. A minor pentatonic, let's do it one more time, the G sharp diminished sound. Right, so that's the idea. If you don't know how to play G sharp diminished 7th arpeggio as well, there are videos on my channel showing you how to do that, but that's the approach. So let's try and do this. Let's put in our G sharp diminished 7th arps over the first two chords, and then over the A minor chord, back to brain off its A minor pentatonic. And let's see if we can play kind of tastefully, you know, make it sound good and not too sort of obviously diminished 7th. Let's try this anyway, right? What could possibly go wrong? now we're starting to the beginnings of the outline of the differentiation between hearing the dominant sides, which is quite specific sound, then hearing the tonic side. So we are beginning just to separate the changes a little bit and play with a bit more harmonic awareness rather than just brain off approaches, okay? Alright, let's look at something else which is inside the harmonic minor scale. If you look at the 5th degree of the harmonic minor scale, as well as an E major triad, we can also find this sound. And this would be an augmented triad. So in this case it's E and G sharp and C. And functionally, an augmented chord really has the same job to do as a dominant chord, so they can be substituted for each other. For instance, you can substitute an augmented triad for a dominant chord, put it in place of it, or use it instead of, or as well as. Now what this means is that when we're playing over this E7, instead of playing just, you know, our diminished 7th stuff, which we've kind of done to death now, we can look at this augmented sound and play that instead, alright? So on our 5 chord, we can play this E augmented sound. Now if you know anything about augmented arpeggios, hopefully you know, or if you don't, you're about to learn, that augmented arpeggios invert in major thirds. So basically every 4 semitones, it's the same arpeggio, just moved up. So E augmented, and C augmented, and G sharp augmented are just inversions of each other. They're just the same thing. So we can use any of these, right? Now this is where it starts getting a bit kind of freaky and a bit interesting. The weird thing about this arpeggio, this augmented arpeggio, is that it can represent both sides of the harmony, because if we play this E augmented triad over an E bass, well, it's just E augmented, which means it sounds like or functions like the 5 chord, or a substitute for the 5 chord, but it definitely has that dominant 5 chord sound. Right, but here's the interesting thing. If we take the same chord and we put it over an A bass, which would represent the tonic side, we actually get a sort of tonic side chord. And the tonic side chord we get is A minor major 7. Got A, E, G sharp, C, and E, which is A minor major 7. So here's the kind of the cool thing about it, and I suppose this is a bit like a more of a turn your brain off approach, is we can actually get this one arpeggio to work over both sides of the harmony, because on the one side it sounds like dominant 7 sharp 5 sound, and then on the other side of the harmony it sounds like A minor major 7. So good news is we know how to play these arpeggios, and we don't actually need to think about making the change when we go dominant to tonic, though we could if we wanted, but we don't have to. So let's do this little demo where we just use these augmented arpeggios to play over the entire chord progression. This sounds quite interesting. Check it out. Say, although this can work over both chords, you probably don't want to do it all the time, because it might start getting, well, any sound if you play it for long enough starts getting tedious. So let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's combine it with, well, let's try first of all, let's play the augmented sounds over the dominant side of the chord progression, and then let's play something that's more deliberately tonic side on the tonic side, and then we should be able to hear the chord progression a little better. And then maybe let's, well, we'll see how we go on, right? So let's just try this. Augmented first, and then resolving to something that's a bit more tonic sounding over the tonic side. So wait till it comes round again. Let's kick off with something A minorish. Resolving. Augmented again. Alrighty, pretty groovy, so that's something that definitely will work. So we can play that augmented thing either over the whole chord progression, or we can just target it on the dominant side. Or we could actually play it on the tonic side as well, couldn't we? So we could do something like, say, play our diminished 7th arpeggio sound on the dominant side, because that's definitely indicated for the dominant side, and then switch to this kind of rather spooky augmented sound on the tonic side. Nice. Okay, right, so, phew, we're getting there. I'm going to take a short break there, guys. Let's get back to this in just a minute.